Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. It's been a while since I did an episode that's just a roundup of the news, but there were actually a few stories that broke in the last 24 hours or so that I wanted to talk about. So we're going to talk about the death of Redbox and really the death of the video rental industry as we know it and as we have known it, as well as a tentative deal to avoid another major Hollywood strike. But the first thing that I want to talk about is the delay, at least, of the release of Horizon: An American Saga Part 2, which is the sequel to the first movie, which hit theaters less than 2 weeks ago and was expected by some people, including myself, to be a potential, at least, sleeper hit for the summer. If you're not familiar with Horizon: An American Saga, it is a multi-part Western movie series that has been a passion project for its writer-director Kevin Costner, but when it was released less than a couple of weeks ago, it was not a financial success at the box office. And as a result, New Line Cinema, which is part of Warner Bros. Discovery, announced yesterday that Horizon Chapter 2, which was scheduled to hit theaters on August 16th, will not be released theatrically as planned. Chapter 1 will be released on premium video on demand next Tuesday and will stream on Max at a date to be determined. In a statement, New Line Cinema said, quote, Territory Pictures and New Line Cinema have decided not to release Horizon Chapter 2 on August 16th in order to give audiences a greater opportunity to discover the first installment of Horizon over the coming weeks, including on PVOD and Max. We thank our exhibition partners for their continued support as moviegoers across the U.S. discover the film in its theatrical run. Pre-sales had already begun for Horizon Chapter 2, which means that theaters and ticket sellers will have to refund patrons their money. And the sequel was reportedly done. Picture locked, everything was ready to go. Kevin Costner has begun shooting Horizon Chapter 3. He paused production in order to go and promote this movie. And the script for Horizon Chapter 4 was allegedly, again, already completely finished. So there was really no wait and see for Kevin Costner on this project. But now there is no theatrical date planned for Chapter 2, and the rest of the franchise is really up in the air. And this was not a cheap project. Media reports have varied. Some say that Horizon Chapter 1 on its own cost $100 million. Some have said that the first two movies together cost $100 million. But regardless, Kevin Costner reportedly has put in $38 million by his own accounting of his own money into the project. Now, the company line on this is that this is just a delay in the theatrical release, and they want to give audiences, and mainly older audiences who are the key demographic for this film, more time to find the movie, as that's generally the behavior for older movie-going audiences. But I'm skeptical of this story, and I'll tell you why. I have a little bit of experience with a situation that's somewhat similar to this. When I first moved to LA many years ago, my first steady gig was working on a network sitcom that featured a movie star who had really just kind of crested the peak of their popularity. It was a big deal that this movie star was doing a TV show. The pilot had already been shot. I worked on the show for several months, and during the time that I worked there, they shot, I would say, 5 or 6 episodes on a studio backlot and on location that would air following the pilot. That's how TV shows used to work. You would film a pilot, it would get tested, the network would pick up the show, and then you would film more episodes months later sometimes in order to keep the show going. But they would all air consecutively when the show actually made it to television. The night after the pilot aired to disappointing ratings, the network called and said that production was going to be paused while they waited to see what the audience response was to the rest of the episodes that we had already filmed. But then later in the week, the network called again and said, well, we're delaying the air dates for the rest of these episodes to sometime TBD. So we don't know when the rest of the episodes are going to air, but they'll air at some time in the future. But those other episodes never aired. And what this basically was a quiet cancellation because the show involved a big star, and because it would be embarrassing to that star to basically have a big network show canceled after only one episode aired. They did it in stages, and that sort of tempered the news around it. So it wasn't this immediate news of a cancellation. It was kind of like, oh yeah, well, we're going to wait and see. Oh yeah, well, it's going to happen sometime in the future. And by the time that didn't happen, the spotlight was kind of off the show altogether, and it just faded away into the background. Now, I have no idea what WB's plans actually are for Horizon Chapter 2, but framing this as a delay in the release and not a cancellation in the release does save Costner the embarrassment of having his big personal project that cost tens of millions of his own dollars and tens of millions of other people's money canceled less than 2 weeks after the first movie premiered in theaters. It allows the story to leak out a little more gradually, and then maybe sometime down the road, we find out that maybe it's not going to hit theaters after all. Maybe it's going to go straight to streaming or get some kind of day-and-date theatrical streaming release. If that were just to be announced immediately, I think that it would look a lot more embarrassing for Costner than the way they're painting it, which is a delay with a window for people to find the movie. As far as Horizon Chapter 3, which is in the middle of filming, I think that it's very up in the air whether it actually resumes filming. And Horizon Chapter 4, I don't think will happen at all, especially when you consider that WB and New Line only picked up distribution for Horizon Chapter 1 and Horizon Chapter 2. If Kevin Costner wants to release this third and fourth part of his saga, he's got to go out there and find another distributor. And given that the market has shown that it is going to be very tough for this movie or these series of movies to ever reach profitability, then I think it's also going to be very difficult for Costner to find another studio or another distributor that's going to be willing to put up the cost to release 2 more movies. Now, I know it's easier to laugh at Kevin Costner here because this is yet another ambitious project that he was all in on that hasn't really delivered, much like The Postman, which at the time of its release was a critical joke and an absolute box office disaster, and even a movie like Waterworld, which was not the financial disaster that it's been painted as, but was a movie that had a runaway budget that became a joke because of how expensive it was, and that underperformed relative to its cost in such a way that many people consider it to be one of the biggest flops of all time, even though it's not really. Honestly, I think it's kind of admirable that Kevin Costner was willing to put so much of his own money into an original series of Western movies, and Westerns are not an easy sell to modern audiences. For every one Western that succeeds, you can point to 3 or 4 other Westerns that don't do well, but Kevin Costner wanted to buy in. He believed in the project, and I don't think that he was necessarily wrong to think that the project would work, because it really was able to get made in the first place because of the success of Yellowstone, which he starred in, the fact that it did so well on TV and streaming, and the thought that maybe that audience would show up for these movies as well. It may not have helped that he very publicly quit the show before the release of Horizon Chapter 1, but he still did try to bring theater goers and audience members a 4-part, multi-hour Western epic series of movies. And I worry that the lesson that the studios are going to take away from this, as always, are the wrong lessons, which is that you should never gamble or take a creative risk on anything original. So we will see what the future has in store for Horizon and American Saga. Maybe New Line and WB will decide to put it out on theaters. Maybe it does become a big hit on streaming. The whole streaming component is a whole new thing when we talk about distribution. And if it really takes off, perhaps the audience will show enough interest in the project for the studio to say, okay, we'll put it in theaters. Maybe it will do decently enough, or at least outperform what Chapter 1 did, that we have faith that it would be worth the time and the resources to re-release it. But that's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, and I think that the future is very much up in the air for this really ambitious movie saga. And if you want to check out Horizon Chapter 1 at some point in the future, one place where you will not be able to find it is in a Redbox kiosk. Redbox was at one time a titan in home entertainment, but news broke last night that its parent company, Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment, was transitioning from Chapter 11 to Chapter 7 bankruptcy, meaning that everything the company owns will be liquidated to pay down their debts, and Redbox's kiosks will disappear, or at least stop dispensing movies and become empty stands that drunk guys pee on at 2 in the morning. When we talk about bankruptcy, there are 2 major kinds. There's Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and it's usually what you hear about when a company says that they're bankrupt. That doesn't mean that the company's going out of business. Chapter 11 bankruptcy basically means that you're allowed to go back and come up with a plan to pay off your creditors. Now, that usually does mean shutting down locations or doing layoffs, but you're allowed to emerge from Chapter 11 as a stronger company, hopefully, or at least a company that doesn't have as much debt. When you go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, you have to go draw up this plan. You have to take it to a judge. The judge has to approve the plan, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to shut down immediately. Red Lobster, for example, just filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Yes, they are shutting down some locations, but the restaurant isn't ceasing to exist. Now, originally, Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment did file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, but they failed to secure funding to resume paying its employees and covering benefits like healthcare, which they had been forced to stop doing due to lack of funds. So they had no choice but to liquidate under Chapter 7 and cease doing business. The company was reportedly nearly $1 billion in debt, with less than half of that on the books as assets, and some of the people they owed money to included major movie studios and major retailers like Walmart. But if you're not familiar with Redbox or its impact or just how big it was at its height, let's take a look back at the history of the company. Redbox was founded in 2002 and was originally meant to vend products that aren't movies. It was meant to sell products including fresh food and dairy exclusively at McDonald's locations. After the chain declined to continue the Redbox program, they then switched exclusively to DVD rentals back in 2004. At its peak, Redbox operated 42,000 kiosks and in 2016 reportedly accounted for more than half of all physical rentals in the US. The company was acquired in 2009 by Coinstar, the company that owns those machines in the grocery store where you put your change into it and they give you your money back. And also in 2009, a little bit of fun movie trivia, they appointed a new president of the company, a guy named Mitch Lowe, who would go on to speedrun another movie-related business into bankruptcy, something you may have heard me talk about here on the channel called MoviePass. Mitch Lowe served as president of Redbox until 2011, when he resigned to pursue other interests, like committing alleged fraud to prop up a disastrously bad concept for selling movie tickets. Despite several legal battles with different movie studios over when those studios would make their movies available for rental, Redbox peaked in 2013 with 775 million rentals from their kiosks. And in 2016, the company was taken over by Apollo Global Management, the company that, alongside Sony, just tried unsuccessfully to buy out Paramount. In 2022, Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment bought Redbox for a reported $375 million, despite the fact that revenue had been on a downward trend for Redbox for years preceding their purchase. So what is Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment? Well, the Chicken Soup for the Soul brand was founded in the 1990s and gained fame, fortune, and popularity through a series of books called Chicken Soup for the Soul, which contained uplifting stories to warm your heart and heal your soul. For 90s kids like me, you may have grown up in a household where your grandmother had a minimum of 5 of these books in a basket on the floor by the couch. The books were a massive hit after spinning off into a version for every possible audience, and the company was eventually sold by its original founders, at which point it expanded its product line beyond publishing. Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment was established in 2017 and made a big splash in 2019 when it acquired the streaming service Crackle from Sony. That's right, buried under all these headlines about the death of Redbox is the death, temporarily at least, of Crackle as well. As often happens in cases like these, basically, Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment tried to grow way too quickly. They acquired way too many things and accumulated way too much debt. And now the company is financially insolvent, which means that it's going to lay off around 1,000 employees. They're shutting down Redbox, and all of their other assets are up for sale, which is why Crackle may not be dead, because technically another company could buy Crackle as part of this bankruptcy sale and revive it. It just depends on what happens. The death of Redbox, in my opinion, really is the final official death of the physical rental industry here in the United States, the industry that brought us Blockbuster Video and hours spent walking the aisles trying to find that perfect movie on a Friday night. Functionally, that is now gone. Now, there are a lot of great people out there that are running independent video rental stores that are trying to keep that industry alive, and I'm sure that some of them are successful, and I salute their work, by the way, because I think that it's also part of film preservation. But as far as the nationwide availability of movies to rent, with Redbox going away, that pretty much goes away as well. And I think it also is a nail in the coffin for physical media, which I don't think is going to go extinct, but I think is headed toward drastically reduced availability. I personally never actually used Redbox, but I do think that it's evidence that truly, when it comes to business, nothing is forever. Even an industry that at one time was used by hundreds of millions of people around the world and was hugely popular in the United States and elsewhere, that industry is now functionally extinct. And for the streaming industry, I would say that after nearly 20 years of fighting, they have now finally slain the physical media dragon. So I want to talk about a strike in Hollywood that seems to have been averted, thankfully. But before I do, I want to thank the sponsor for this video, The Perfect Gene. This video is brought to you by The Perfect Gene. It's the summer, which means fun and sun, but also a lot of uncomfortable situations for people like me who just like to wear jeans. Sometimes it's the humidity both outside and inside your jeans, leaving you feeling, well, swampy. And sometimes it's a long plane ride or a road trip, which can feel even longer if your jeans are crushing your beach balls. Let's face it, summer's never really been a great time to love jeans, until now. The Perfect Gene has nailed the solution to all your denim difficulties. Not only are they great looking and perfect fitting, they're also light and stretchy, so you can enjoy the hot weather without creating your own tropical climate. The Perfect Gene wants every guy to look and feel great in their jeans, so they have 6 fits from skinny to thick, with waist sizes from 26 to 50 and lengths from 26 to 38. So they've got the perfect size for you. I was picking out my jeans this morning and I literally dug around in my jeans drawer, making sure that I grabbed my perfect jeans to wear first. They are by far the best fitting and most comfortable jeans I've ever owned, and I've been wearing jeans for a very long time. It's finally time to stop sweating the summer away in uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectgene.nyc. Viewers and listeners to the show get 15% off your first order, plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use code DAN15 at checkout. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectgene.nyc with promo code DAN15. After you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them, so please support the show and tell them that I sent you. F your khakis and get The Perfect Gene. All right, so before we wrap up, I want to talk about something that's had people in Hollywood worried for months now. You may have noticed that even after the actors and writers strikes were settled last year, some people were saying that they weren't ready to breathe a sigh of relief just yet because there was another potential looming strike that would have happened this summer. And that strike involved contract negotiations between the AMPTP and the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, the trade union that covers the majority of crew members in Los Angeles, from makeup artists to cinematographers to editors to electricians. While IATSE shared some of the concerns of actors and writers, such as protection against the use of AI, most of their concerns were about everyday labor issues, which isn't really that surprising given the nature of their union. And as with any negotiation, it appears that they got some of what they wanted, but also didn't get a lot of what they were asking for. Let's go over some of the big headlines from the deal. First of all, as far as wage increases, the proposed agreement offers a 7% increase to the minimum salaries paid to workers in year 1 of this 3-year contract, followed by a 4% increase in year 2 and a 3.5% increase in year 3, with increased contributions from the producers to health and pension plans also included. The new contract also includes an entirely new section regarding pension contributions for streaming programming that outlines minimum contributions from studios based on streaming program length and budget, as well as additional pension contributions that act as a performance bonus if the program is watched by 20% or more of a streamer's domestic subscribers. The wage issues are usually one of the first things worked out in negotiations like this, but there was another major issue that a lot of people in IATSE wanted to be addressed in this contract, and that was the length of a shoot day. Because if you've worked in production or if you know people that work in production, you'll know that movie shoots and TV shoots are often very long days, 12 plus hours, and there was genuine concern from a lot of crew members regarding the length of those days and crew safety. The fact that crew had to get home after long shoot days, that exhaustion could play a factor in potential car accidents, and really that crews would just be physically exhausted from working so much, which could increase the probability of on-set accidents. Well, IATSE did not get a restriction on time worked, but they did get increased compensation for extremely long hours. If employees are required to work 14 hours or more inside the Los Angeles studio zone, the producers are required to offer those crew members either courtesy accommodations for the night or free round-trip transportation both home and back to the set for the next day's work. Crew members would also be reimbursed if they elect to use rideshare instead of the producer-provided transportation. By the way, if you want to know what I'm talking about when I say the LA studio zone, there's essentially a point in West LA LA that is the center of a circle. And from that center, there's a radius of 30 miles. And that's considered to be the studio zone, basically the primary work area for any film shoot that's centered and based in Los Angeles. That studio zone, which has a radius of 30 miles, is also called by some people the 30-mile zone. And that was abbreviated by the website TMZ, 30-mile zone, for their name, because their whole point was we're covering all of the Hollywood gossip inside the radius of Hollywood. Just kind of a fun fact for you there. If the shoot is happening in what's called the secondary studio zone, which is a radius that extends further outside of Los Angeles, producers can choose to provide either free accommodation or free transportation at their discretion, but they must provide one of those two services. There was also an increase in wages paid for extensive shoot days. Any work that extends into a rest period or the time built into the production schedule between shoot days to give the crew time to rest before returning to work will now pay double time instead of just additional time worked. For long shoot days that occur inside either of the two studio zones, crew members are now required to be paid double time for any time worked over 14 hours and triple time for any time worked over 15 hours for the first 5 consecutive shooting days. On the 6th consecutive shooting day, crew members would be paid triple time for all time over 14 hours. And if the shoot goes 7 consecutive days, crew members would be paid quadruple time, or 4 times their minimum salary, for any and all time worked past 14 hours. Now, these rules don't apply as written to shoots that happen outside of the studio zones, because there's a whole other set of rules where you're officially on location away from home base. And there are also some slightly different rules for shoots that are happening on studio lots. For studio shoots, these wage increases kick in after 12 hours, not 14 and 15 hours. And that's because if you're shooting on a studio lot, there's a lot less work to do as far as setup and breakdown for the crew, because you have standing sets. You're not having to bring equipment in and out of a practical location. And so the crews basically go into this double, triple, quadruple overtime much sooner because they don't have the same amount of work to do. The guaranteed lodging and transportation, as well as the increased compensation for long shoot dates, would certainly address any concerns that people had as far as the monetary impact of a long shoot day. But it will be interesting, as this contract goes to the full IATSE union for ratification, what the response will be from those who were pushing for reform, not in compensation, but in prohibition of these excessive shooting days, because of the toll that it takes on the crew. I don't necessarily know if they're going to be satisfied by these changes, and that could be a concern for union leaders as this ratification vote moves forward. The new contract also offers some language regarding the use of artificial intelligence, or AI. It grandfathers in any current technology in use for applications like VFX that could be defined as, quote, traditional AI, and approves its use consistent with historical practices. But it also allows producers to use new AI technology in production, with the provision that employees utilizing that technology are still covered by the contract. The contract also states that no employee will be required to use AI, quote, in a manner that results in the displacement of a covered employee, meaning no one can be forced to use the technology in a way that will cause a current worker to lose his or her existing job. And the contract says that requiring a worker to use AI is subject to a consultation with the producers about the use of the technology, quote, provided that the requirements of production allow time for the consultation. In other words, if you have a problem with using AI, you can ask the producer to talk about it, but they have to deem that there is time to have that conversation. Now, I'm not an IATSE member, so I don't really have a vested interest here, but to my eyes, these seem like somewhat weak protections. First of all, the only crew members that actually are protected by this contract are ones that could lose their existing job through the use of AI technology, but it's not really addressed that the expanded use of the technology could lead to fewer crew members being hired overall. And you could get yourself into a situation where an art department, for example, consists of 2 people, where it used to consist of 10 people because of the use of AI technology. And the producers could say, well, no, we're under the contract because no existing jobs were cost. We're just hiring less people. I know that may seem like kind of a cynical reading, but producers can be cynical people. In addition, the consultation clause seems to be the only way that an individual worker can raise concerns regarding the use of AI, and this seems to be, once again, at the discretion of the producer, who could say, well, I'd love to have this conversation and consultation with you, but the production schedule just doesn't allow time for us to consult. So you're just going to have to go ahead and use that technology. I would imagine this will be the most controversial part of the new contract, especially in guilds like animation and art direction, where their workers would be the most impacted if AI were to gain widespread use. We already had a miniature version of this debate with the use of some AI-generated artwork in the movie Late Night with the Devil, and I think that it's probably just the first of many debates that we're going to see about this in the weeks, months, and years ahead. So those are the basic outlines of some of the biggest provisions in the new contract. The full IATSE membership will vote on this contract next week from July 14th to the 17th, and the results are expected to be announced 1 week from today on July 18th. Should IATSE members reject the contract, there would be precious little time to resume negotiations before the current deal expires on July 31st and a potential crew strike would begin. So for now, it seems like we may have avoided another Hollywood strike, but I think that there are a lot of people in the entertainment industry that have been holding their breath since last summer and can't really breathe easy until this deal is officially ratified next week. So that's a roundup of some of the biggest stories happening in the entertainment world right now. What do you think of all of this? The delay of Horizon, the death of Redbox, the aversion of another strike? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, stay tuned right here to the channel for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.